Good morning. Welcome to the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences and today's press conference about the Prize in Economic Sciences in Memory of Nobel. I'd like to extend a special welcome to all of you who are following this press conference on TV or on the internet. I am Göran Hansen. I'm the Secretary General of the Academy, and with me today are two members of the Academy's Prize Committee for Economic Sciences. On my right, Professor Peter Fredriksson, who is the chairman of the committee, and on my left, Professor Eva Mörk, who is also a member of the committee. The Academy met in session this morning to award the Prize in Economic Sciences. We are a little bit late because it took some time to reach some of the laureates, but we are now ready to announce the prize to you and to the world. I will read the announcement in Swedish and in English. Professor Fredriksson will make some remarks on behalf of the prize committee, and Professor Mörk will tell us more about the science that is being awarded today. This year's prize is about drawing conclusions from unintended experiments. Årets pris handlar om att dra slutsatser från oplanerade experiment. Kungliga Vetenskapsakademin har idag beslutat att utdela Sveriges Riksbanks Pris i ekonomisk vetenskap till Alfred Nobels minne för år 2021. Ena hälften tilldelas David Card för hans empiriska bidrag till arbetsmarknadsekonomi. Den andra hälften går gemensamt till Joshua D. Angrist och Guido W. Imbens för deras metodologiska bidrag till analysen av kausala samband. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has today decided to award Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in Memory of Alfred Nobel, with one half to David Card for his empirical contributions to labor economics, and the other half jointly to Joshua D. Angrist and Guido W. Imbens for their methodological contributions to the analysis of causal relationships. And here we'll get some biographic data about our new laureates. David Card was born in Guelph in Canada in 1956. He received his PhD in 1983 from Princeton University in the United States, and he's currently professor of economics at the University of California at Berkeley. Joshua D. Angrist was born in 1960 in Columbus, Ohio in the United States. He also got his PhD from Princeton University in 1989, and he is now professor of economics at Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the US. Guido W. Imbens was born in 1963 in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. He got his PhD in 1991 from Brown University in Providence in the United States, and he is nowadays professor of applied econometrics and economics at Stanford University in the US. And with that, I'd like to ask Peter Fredriksson to make some remarks on behalf of the prize committee. Peter, please.
Thank you, Göran. Uncovering causal relationships is a major challenge. This is particularly true in the social sciences, where many pressing questions cannot be answered using randomized experiments. But sometimes, nature or policy changes provide situations that resemble randomized experiments. This year's laureates have shown that such natural experiments help answer important questions for society. David Card's empirical contributions have improved our understanding of labor markets. His initial work challenged conventional wisdom, which led to new studies and additional insights. Joshua Angrist and Guido Imbens have clarified exactly what conclusions about cause and effect that can be drawn from natural experiments. Their framework for estimation, validation, and interpretation has been widely adopted in applied work. The combined contributions of the laureates have completely reshaped empirical work in the economic sciences. And therefore, our ability to answer causal questions of great importance to us all has improved tremendously.
Thank you, Peter. Now I'd like to ask Eva Mörk to tell us about the research that led to today's prize. Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Göran. So, many important questions are about cause and effect. Will people become healthier if their income increases? How does immigration affect wages and employment in the receiving countries? Do lockdowns reduce the spread of infections? If you take a couple of minutes, you can easily come up with many more similar questions. The problem when answering these broad questions about cause and effect is that we will never know what would have happened under a different scenario. How healthy would an individual have been had their income been higher or lower? One way to draw conclusions about causal relationships is to conduct randomized experiments where we let decide whether an individual should undergo a specific intervention or not. This method has been successfully used in, for example, medicine when developing new drugs. However, for many questions in social sciences, it's simply not possible, either for practical or ethical reasons, to conduct randomized experiments. This year's laureates have shown that it's still possible to answer these broad questions about cause and effects, and that the way to do that is to use natural experiments. A natural experiment is a policy or an event that just happens to divide individuals into a treatment and a control group, as if it was random, without the intervention of the researcher. So let me give you an example. One question that we really would like to know the answer to is, how do attending school affect learning and later outcomes? But of course, we cannot randomize and let some individuals take part in school and forbid others from going to school. So this is very difficult. However, one thing that is random, that's the exact day when babies are born. This implies that babies born on Midnight Eve should on average be very, very similar to babies born on January the 1st. They just happen to be born on different sides of midnight. However, they will be born in different calendar years. And in many countries, you start school depending on which calendar year you are born. So depending on which side of midnight these kids are born, they will start school in different years. Now, because of the pandemic, we have had a situation where schools have been closed in many countries. This implies that these babies that were very similar just happened to be born on either side of midnight. Some of them start school a year when everything is as usual. Others start school when schools are closed. So here, nature has given us an experiment that makes it possible to answer questions that would otherwise not have been possible to answer. So this is just one example of a natural experiment, and there are many more. Let me now start by telling you more about David Card's contribution, and thereafter turn to the contributions by Joshua Angrist and Guido Imbens. In the early 1990s, the conventional wisdom among us economists was that the high minimum wage led to lower employment. This view was in line with the standard textbook model, where higher wages make it more difficult, more expensive for firms to hire, thereby reducing the labor demand and the equilibrium level of employment. The view was also supported by existing empirical findings that showed that minimum wages tended to be negatively correlated with employment. But did this correlation really imply that there also was a causal relationship? Perhaps there was something else that affected both wages and employment, both minimum wages and employment, or maybe the causal link even went in the opposite direction. That is, low employment led to higher minimum wages. To analyze this, David Card, together with late Alan Kruger used a natural experiment from the US. They focused on the fast food restaurants, a sector where wages are low and where a high minimum wage is likely to make a difference. They noted that in the US state, New Jersey, the minimum wage was increased by 80 cents per hour in 1992. Just comparing what happened with employment as a result of this is not enough to tell you about the causal answer, because many other things could have affected employment as well. So Card and Kruger, just in a randomized experiment, they needed a control group. They noted that in the neighboring Pennsylvania, there was no change in the minimum wage. Of course, the labor market could be quite different in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. But close to the border, it's likely that it's the common labor market, especially in the fast food sector. Hence, they compared the changes in employment in New Jersey with the changes in employment in eastern Pennsylvania. Contrary to the prevalent view, they did not find that employment fell in New Jersey compared to eastern Pennsylvania. Hence, they concluded that the increase in the minimum wage did not lead employment to fall. This finding was very surprising for the research community and led to a large stream of follow-up research, where David Card himself continued to be an important contributor. So thanks to the pioneering work and the research that follows, we today know that the negative employment effect of higher minimum wages are typically quite small, and the explanation is partly to be found in the way firms behave. In the early 1990s, David Card also turned to another set of other questions in the labor market using natural experiments. How is the labor market affected by immigration? How do investment in school affect pupils' future earnings? Once again, correlation does not imply that there is a correlation. So, for example, looking at the first question, we know that migrants tend to locate in regions where the labor market is good. So just comparing employment and wages in regions with a lot of immigration and with a little immigration will not tell you the causal answer. Similarly, if we tend to invest more in schools where the pupil perform worse, there might even be a negative correlation between school resources and pupils' future earnings, even though there is, in fact, a causal relation. So by applying natural experiments to analyze these questions, David Card was able to come up with new and more credible answers. These answers were sometimes at odds with previous work, which led to new research. And together, we today know much more about the labor market thanks to this work. So let me now turn to the contributions by Joshua Angrist and Guido Imbens. So the early applications of natural experiments raised new questions about exactly which conclusions about causality can one draw from a natural experiment. A big difference between a clinical trial and a natural experiment is that in a natural experiment, the researcher does not have full control over who really participates in an intervention. So imagine a researcher who wants to analyze how biking or cycling affects health, so the health effects of improved biking. This researcher notices that there are two very, very similar companies closely to each other with similar employees. But in one of these companies, the employer gave its employees a bike for Christmas in order to make them commute to work by cycling. So this is a natural experiment. However, the employees who got the bike for Christmas will be very differently affected by this natural experiment. Some will now start to cycle. Some would have cycled anyway and will continue to do that. And some will still leave the bike at home and take the car. Similarly, in the control company, the company without the Christmas gift, or at least without a bike for Christmas, there will be people that cycles anyway. There will be some that would have started to cycle if they had gotten a bike, and there will be others who would still have taken the car. Even more confusing for this poor researcher is that the health effects of cycling is probably quite different for these 3 different types of individuals. Perhaps it's the guy who still takes the car who would have benefited the most from cycling. So how is it possible in such a setting to say anything about causal effects, and for whom? In an influential study in 1994, Joshua Angrist and Guido Imbens answered these questions. Importantly, they showed that it's still possible to estimate a well-defined causal effect of an intervention, even when the researcher cannot control who takes part in the intervention and when the effect of the intervention differs between individuals. Importantly, this effect will only be valid for those who actually change their behavior because of the natural experiment. So in our example, it will be for those who now start to cycle to work because they got a gift. This effect has been called the local average treatment effect, the LATE. The researcher will never be able to tell exactly who these people are, but it's possible to determine how large the group is and also to describe it. When deriving these key results, Angrist and Imbens also developed a transparent framework that had turned out to be extremely useful for researchers working with data and has also been widely adopted. By clarifying the underlying assumptions, this framework increased transparency in empirical work and thereby also credibility of empirical work. So, to conclude, David Card's early applications of natural experiments to important questions, together with Angrist and Imbens' methodological insights, have revolutionized empirical work in economics. They have shown that it's indeed possible to answer important questions, even when it's not possible to conduct randomized experiments. Their approach has also spread to other social sciences outside of economics. One might have thought that natural experiments, at least natural experiments that can answer important questions, would be rare. But the last 30 years of research has proven otherwise. Natural experiments are everywhere. So thanks to the contributions of the laureates, we researchers are today able to answer key questions for economic and social policy, and thereby the laureates' work has greatly benefited the society at large. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Eva, for that excellent presentation. Now it's time for questions, and we may have one of our new laureates with us on a phone line. Professor Imbens, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. This is Göran Hansen, who called you, what was it, an hour ago, to give you the good news.
Yes.
And now we're in the midst of the press conference here in the Academy, and I'm sure the journalists have questions for you. Are you ready for them?
Yes, thank you.
So, who would like to start? Yes, please. David Keaton from Associated Press, I think it is.
Yes, indeed, David Keaton, Associated Press. Sir, congratulations on this award. Can you tell us, maybe briefly, what you thought when you received the prize, what you were doing, what was your initial reaction when you received this celebration today?
Well, I was asleep. Obviously, I was a little after 2 o'clock here in the morning, and so we were, the whole house was asleep here. We'd had a busy weekend, kids doing all sorts of things, and so I was just absolutely stunned then to get a telephone call, and then I was just absolutely thrilled to hear the news. In particular, kind of hearing that I got to share this with Josh Angrist and David Carr, who are both very good friends of mine. Josh Angrist was actually the best man at Susan AC and my wedding, so he's a very good friend, both professional and personal. So I'm just thrilled to share the prize with both him and David.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Professor Imbens? Yes, please, the lady over there.
Thank you for the question, and congratulations on getting the award. So I'm
Thank
a
you.
reporter with Nordic Chinese Times, and my question is, what motivates you in your field of research? And if there's any advice you could give to the younger generation of researchers, or just young people who are interested in economics? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, economics is a really interesting discipline these days, where you can look at so many questions and look at it so many different ways. There are obviously so many things we don't really fully understand, where people are still doing research, and that it sort of includes lots of questions about causality, but just in general questions about economic policy. And economics tends to be a very good discipline for allowing people to pursue questions that are quite broad and quite whatever they're interested in. And so, if for young people thinking about a career in economics, I think that's a great choice. There's just so many interesting questions in so many areas where economists do useful work, kind of both in policy as well as these days in many cases in the private industry.
Great, thank you. Do we have more questions to our laureate? Yes, please.
Congratulations. This is TT News Agency.
Thank
you. I wonder, a very simple question. Do you have any idea what you're going to do with the prize money?
No, I have not. I don't actually have any idea what the amount of the prize is, and so so I have no idea what we're going to do. But actually, one other thing I wanted to say, I really enjoyed the presentation that was just done, and I particularly liked the examples about the bicycles, because obviously being Dutch, the idea of commuting by bike is something that's very close to my heart, and here living on campus, it's something I'm very fortunate to be able to do.
And you are from the Netherlands, aren't you, originally?
Yes,
So-
yes, I grew up in the Netherlands.
A country of bikers.
Exactly.
Yeah, do we have any more questions now? Yeah, David Keaton wants... Okay, yes, first we'll give word to the lady over there.
Thank you. I'm Jing from Nordic Chinese Times. Congratulations, Professor. My question is,
Thank you.
what was your biggest challenge in your past research, and what might be your next step? For example, what specific areas do you plan to apply this natural experiments to some applicable areas? Thank you.
Yeah, so most of the work I do is the more methodological kind of, and it's sort of, I've loved kind of working kind of with Josh and talking to people like David Carr and other colleagues of mine like Raj Chetty, and kind of thinking about the empirical problems they're working on and trying to help them develop better methods for doing so. And in terms of the first part, the challenge for me, it's been kind of trying to understand when people do empirical work, what exactly the methodological challenges are, and kind of trying to come up with good research questions, and there I've just been very fortunate in having had a lot of great colleagues doing very interesting work.
Thank you. Well, quick. We have 2 quick follow-up questions, very brief.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, very brief. The pandemic was a huge blow here to the labor market. How long do you think this will take to recover, and what's your view on that problem?
Yeah, obviously it's been a huge problem. I think the biggest challenge is been that the problem has been so unequal for different parts of the population. For some jobs, it turned out to actually, given the technological advances, to be relatively easy to adapt and work from home. And sort of for my profession in particular, we've been incredibly fortunate in that the impact has been much less. But for other parts of the economy, for other parts of the world, these challenges obviously have been incredibly difficult. I'm not an expert kind of on exactly how quickly we're going to be able to adapt and get out of the problems related to the pandemic. But so I don't want to say anything there. But I think a particular challenge is how unequal the impact has been in different parts of the population as well as different parts of the world.
Indeed, I'm sure that's a question that all of us will come back to in the near future. A quick question, again, from David Keaton of Associated Press.
Thank you. Very briefly, the world of science has decades of time now to integrate your research into their natural experiments and sort of nuancing the difference between correlation and causality. However, among the general public, specifically when we talk about themes like minimum wage, immigration, these are, as well as being economic issues, they also very strong political points, specifically in the United States. How do you believe that your science and your research can help nuance and educate the general debate in America around the minimum wage and about immigration?
Yeah, that's obviously a very important issue, and I think the U.S. has traditionally been very good in bringing science and information into the policy debate. There's always been a lot of exchange between the academic community and the policy establishment as well as the government. And so that's been more of a challenge in recent years. But I hope, and I think sort of at various parts of the government, people do pay attention to the work that's being done in economics on these questions. And I think David Cart and Alan Kruger's work on the minimum wage was certainly featured prominently in the policy debates in the 90s, very quickly after that was published.
Thank you very much, Professor Imbens. I'm afraid we'll have to move on. So thank you for being with us also at this press conference. And again, warmest congratulations to your prize.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I'm absolutely...
Bye.
Bye.
Now, are there questions to the panel? No questions to the panel as far as I can see. Then it's time to move on to individual interviews with experts. But before we do that, allow me to add a personal comment. This was my last Nobel announcement after 12 years, 24 press conferences, and 67 phone calls to prize winners. It's been an exciting journey and a great privilege. And I'm grateful to my co-workers and my collaborators, and also to you, ladies and gentlemen of the media, for a very stimulating dialogue. Thank you very much.
tid var det? Okej, bra. Hej. Yes, sure. Som du märker.
Professor Eva Mörk, can you summarize what this year's prizes, awards are given for?
I'd be happy to do that. So this prize is for answering big questions about causality when it's not possible to conduct randomized experiments, which is the case often in social sciences. So David Card has, in a number of early contributions in the early 90s, shown that it's possible to answer big, important questions in labor economics using natural experiments. And Joshua Angrist and Guido Imbens have together explained exactly what conclusions we can draw about causality, and thereby also developed a framework that has been widely adopted by researchers when working with real-world data.
Do you have any examples of what questions were the important ones?
Yes, so for example, if we go back to the early 1990s, people, or mostly economists, believed that high minimum wages led to lower employment, that there were large employment and wage falls when there were large immigration, and that school resources did not really matter for pupils' outcomes. So these were three things that we thought were true. But thanks to the work by David Card, we know now that the answers were simply different than the ones we thought earlier on.
What were the answers?
So minimum wages, surprisingly, did not seem to lead to an increase or a fall in employment. This was true in the initial study by David Card and his late colleague Alan Kruger, but it has also been shown to be true also in later work, both in Europe and in the US. And when it comes to migration, it's typically the case that the native workers, they can rather gain from immigration, whereas it is those that immigrated earlier that are the ones who lose economically. And school resources are important for pupils' future earnings, especially for pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Well, what kind of resources do you mean in school?
So it can be like a number of teachers, school books, school lunches, etc. So different things that we invest to make school quality higher.
And how would you explain this award to a child, like 10 years old?
Mm-hmm. So I would say, research is a bit like being a detective. You have these big, important questions that you want to answer. And then you have to figure out a way to answer the question. In this way, you have to figure out a way where some people that look very similar, just by chance, are treated differently. And by doing that, you can actually see what this intervention or this treatment that happens to these people, the effect of that. So that it's like a detective work. I would say that's the main takeaway from a 10 years old.
And this award is especially about a kind of experiments, natural experiments.
Exactly.
You called it unintended.
Exactly, something that just happened. It was not, I mean, many experiments when we conduct, the researcher sits in his office, thinks, how should I do this? Let's conduct this experiment. In this case, something has already happened. So there was a policy rule, or there happened something, there came a pandemic, something happened that just meant that there was an experiment without the researcher being involved.
And the new thing about those natural experiments, what was it?
So the thing is that, I mean, this is something that's been around for a long time. The idea that sometimes something can be used. But what was really new here was that David Card, he showed that for really, really big questions, things where we thought we will never be able to say anything about the causal effect here, we can actually do that thanks to these natural experiments.
And this was done in the 90s?
Yes, so there was a revolution, one could say, in the early 1990s, where a number of key studies came using natural experiments by David Card. Joshua Angrist were also involved, and the late Alan Kruger. And then a couple of years later, in the mid-90s, Guido Imbens and Joshua Angrist started to think about, okay, so what's going on? What can we really say? I mean, there was a big revolution. Everyone was super enthusiastic. And then one started to think, okay, so is this a good thing? Can we really say something about this? And then Angrist and Imbens showed that, yes, we can indeed do that. And this is exactly what we can say.
So how come this work is recognized now?
You know, it's always the case that it takes, so you have a big intervention or big discovery, but then you need to see, does this hold up against time? Is this something that was just people were super enthusiastic over in the beginning, or this is something we can actually learn about? So, I mean, I think that's the case with all the economic prizes and all the other Nobel Prizes as well, that the things that are awarded are not the things that happened this year, but a couple of years ago, when we have time to really understand and evaluate these innovations clearly.
Can you tell us something about the laureates? Did they work together? Or?
Yes, so as Guido Imbens said here at the press conference, Joshua Angrist was actually his best man at the wedding, and Joshua Angrist was also his supervisor. So, I mean, there are very close interaction between these people.
And then you have the third laureate?
David Card. So he hasn't worked together with them, but they are all, I mean, working quite closely. And one of the reactions when we talked to Professor Imbens this morning was that he was so thrilled that he got it together with these two others, that he said, my close friends, this makes it even better. So.
And what did the other two say?
So we never managed to get hold of Joshua Angrist. So, but David Card was also super happy. He was more, you know, Canadian, being a bit calm in the beginning, but yeah, he was also super happy about sharing it with these two guys.
And my last question would be, what makes you enthusiastic about this prize?
So what makes, I think it's totally revolutionized the way we do empirical work. When I compare with when I was a PhD student a long time ago, I mean, the kind of methods we learned, the kind of questions we could answer about causality, I mean, it was really building on a lot of theoretical assumptions that we kind of knew were not really true. But now we can do that. We can go out and answer these super interesting, relevant questions about so many different things, about how early interventions in children's life affect the later outcomes, how different tax and benefit systems affect a lot of things. So we can give so much better policy advices thanks to this work.
Thank you very much, Eva Mörk, for talking to us. Thanks.